The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov there, and before him the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Well, earlier the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi urged G20 members to put aside their differences and focus on the needs of developing nations.
Deep global divisions. At Foreign Minister, it is but natural that your discussions are affected by the geopolitical tensions of the day. We all have our positions and our perspectives on how this tension should be resolved. However, at the leading economies of the world, we also have a responsibility toward those who are not in this room. We should not allow issues that we cannot resolve together to come in the way of those we can.
Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India there. Well, for more on this story, let's cross over to London to speak to Arise correspondent Laurie Laird. Good to see you, Laurie. So divisions over Ukraine, hijacking yet another international gathering with angry scenes at that G20 summit. Just summarise for us the top lines that have emerged from that summit.
I think the top line, Charles, is that there is the consensus that we had expected, that we had grown used to over the past year over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that is starting to fray a little bit. There was no communique. I don't think we should be surprised that there was no communique, although there was a communique a year ago when the G20 happened in Indonesia. Of course, that was right after the invasion. And I think there was such a shock at that point that it was easier to get agreement amongst the G20 to condemn Russia's aggression. That was not present here at all. And I think this is the worry, that this international consensus is beginning to fray a bit. And I think India is a perfect example of this. India wants to maintain relations with both Russia and the US. And it shows you how difficult it will be to continue to forge this consensus.
Absolutely. So clearly a fractious meeting, and the bottom line is they failed to agree on a joint statement, despite the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi calling on countries to find common ground. And more importantly, perhaps to people like us who are in Africa, no discussion on the needs of developing countries.
Absolutely. And I think this will be a disappointment for Mr. Modi. He really is, I think, very keen to take what he thinks is his rightful place on the stage. That India will be the biggest, the most populous country in the world, not in just a few months on current predictions. I think Mr. Modi thinks it is time for him to step up and to be a real player in diplomatic affairs. And this is the way he wanted to do it, to discuss what is happening with developing nations that are feeling the strain of this war much more acutely than any other country. But we never expected that this G20 was going to go well. I think the scenes of acrimony and from what I understand, some really testy, heated exchanges between Antony Blinken and Sergei Lavrov. We saw both of those men just a few moments ago. I think the US is trying to pin this very short meeting that Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Blinken had on the sidelines of the meeting. U.S. is trying to paint this as perhaps a tentative step forward, a way for maybe Russia and the U.S. to find cooperation in other areas. And the State Department has made it clear that one of the things that Antony Blinken wanted to communicate is that he would very much like to see Russia reverse its decision to pull out of the New START treaty, which is the last existing nuclear treaty between Russia and the U.S.
Well, obviously it was an exceedingly brief meeting. I understand it lasted 10 minutes. And obviously also, apparently, from just hearing them talk, a fractious meeting. How much does that highlight the dearth of communication between Russia and America?
People who find it somewhat soothing that the two men met at all. That was unexpected. It's the highest level contact between the two countries since the 24th of February 2022. So that if you want to be optimistic, perhaps this is something to grab onto. The other thing that Antony Blinken communicated is that he would like to see Russia release a man called Paul Whelan, who has been held prisoner in Russia since 2018. And it shows, I think, that the U.S. is looking for lower level agreements to perhaps find some way to work with Russia on smaller issues, and perhaps that cooperation can continue. But I think my concern out of this meeting is watching this international consensus fray as the war grinds on, and we now have a sense that this war will not be ending anytime soon. Can this coalition of democracies continue to support Ukraine? Will their populations allow them to continue to support Ukraine militarily and financially?
Well, that's a very important point that you've made, because on the one hand, we can see that the war in Ukraine is important enough to have overshadowed a G20 meeting. On the other, I have to ask you, and you seem to be saying, that the international diplomacy over Ukraine is failing, or appears to be failing.
I'm not sure failing is quite the right word, although I think failure down the road is a possibility. But the energy, the will to support Ukraine seems to be fading. And remember, all of these countries have, or most of these countries have, their own democracies. They have voters to whom they are beholden. And I'm just looking at the U.S. While the U.S., Joe Biden has been very clear that he will stand by Ukraine for however long it takes for Ukraine to establish a settlement that suits them. Joe Biden won't be in office for all that long. And we're seeing squeals out of the Republican Party about how long financially the U.S. can support Ukraine. We're going to see that in other countries as well. And as you say, with developing nations, many nations want their diplomats, their leaders, to focus on what is going on at home. So there is a great deal of concern about how long this coalition can last.
And obviously this G20 summit is taking place in India. What is this balancing act that India is trying to play in all this? I mean, has this meeting shed more light on exactly where it stands with Ukraine?
I think that's such a fascinating, sort of side story to this, because Narendra Modi really wanted this to be a showcase for the future of India. India as soon to be the most populous country in the world. India, the fastest growing big economy in the world, and economic management in India has been pretty good over the past couple of years. It's one of the few countries that's experiencing good growth. Inflation is not all that high; it's above target, but the Indian economy is in good shape. And I think Narendra Modi may have viewed the G20 as his coming out party. And so far, he has managed to balance these two sides. He is still on chummy turns with chummy turns with Russia. India is benefiting from cheaper Russian oil. Russia is selling oil to India at what we believe to be a discount. India is a very big net importer of oil. On the other hand, the U.S. wants to keep India friendly as a counterbalance to China. So far, Narendra Modi is walking a tightrope, but he's staying on it. He's remained balanced.
Very interesting indeed. Laurie, thanks very much. Laurie Laird, Arise correspondent, talking to me there from London.